A single bridge on the Dnipro just turned from concrete into a question mark because one midnight convoy tried to cross and the river did not blink. Russia pushed a long line of trucks toward the far bank, and the plan looked simple on paper, since fuel, shells, and spare parts move wars as surely as tanks do. Sensors watched the sky, radars turned in slow circles, and crews felt safe under a shield that promised to see trouble before it arrived. But protection that looks perfect from above can hide a blind edge below, and a blind edge is all a planner needs when timing, angle, and weight line up. What happened next was not about bigger weapons, it was about pressure at the right spot, because logistics break first where routes narrow and traffic slows. A few seconds changed the rhythm of an entire front, and the price tag did not match the effect, since cheap moves can make expensive systems feel slow. Tonight's report breaks down how that window opened, why the shield stumbled, and what it means for the southern fight in the days ahead. Stay with Military Force, subscribe for clear maps and real numbers, and tell us what you would harden first if you ran the defense. At about 2 a.m., a long Russian convoy rolled onto a strategic bridge over the Dnipro, and the escort believed the shield above them would hold. The line stretched for kilometers, with trucks carrying shells, fuel, and repair kits, and the purpose was simple because armies move only as fast as their supplies. Mobile Panzer S-1 crews scanned the air, long-range radar turned in quiet circles, and drivers kept pace to keep spacing tight. The chosen hour favored secrecy, since nighttime cuts casual eyes and slows civilian traffic, and that timing can hide a large move. Command vehicles sat near the middle to keep radios clear, while recovery trucks waited at the tail to pull any breakdowns aside. On paper, the formation looked disciplined and safe, yet paper cannot feel weight and stress. The scene promised control from above, but control from above can still miss what sits just below the deck. That is the point where Ukrainian planners began to shape the fight. Ukrainian command had tracked the route and the timing over several days, and the goal was not to chase trucks but to break the bridge at its weakest moment. Engineers know that midspan takes the greatest bending force when mass stacks up, and that force grows fast when heavy vehicles slow down together. If the center cracks while the load is highest, the repair is not a patch. It is a full rebuild under pressure. A moving column can ride out a small scare, yet a stopped column becomes a target that cannot step away. The window was narrow, measured in seconds, because the aim was to lock weight over the same concrete and then cut the support that holds it. That kind of strike does not need many explosives if the structure is already near its limit, and that is why timing beats size. All of this depends on reading rhythm, and rhythm was about to shift against the convoy. The escort shield looked strong against threats from the sky, but it was thin against threats that hugged concrete and water. Panzer S-1 is fast and lethal against a clear radar track, yet low angles near steel and rebar throw clutter that can hide small objects. Long-range sensors see far but struggle to resolve targets under a bridge deck, and that blind edge grows wider when rivers bounce signals back. Convoy rules also create small delays because crews must confirm contacts and clear fire lanes before they shoot into a complex scene. Truck spacing that is safe on open road becomes tight on a span with guardrails, since braking distance shrinks and lanes have no shoulder. Once one vehicle slows on the grade, every truck behind it stacks weight over the same beams, and that stack raises stress faster than drivers expect. A shield can be thick in the air and thin at the girders, and thin at the girders is where plans can fail. That is how a protected lane can turn into a kill zone without a single jet in sight. If the bridge failed with the convoy massed at center, the southern front would feel it within days, not weeks. Artillery units burn shells at a steady rate, so a pause and resupply cuts tempo before any map changes. Fuel for trucks and recovery teams drains even faster when routes swing wide, and wide detours cost time and expose traffic to more eyes. Ferries and pontoons exist, but building and guarding them under threat is slow, and slow repairs give the attacker room to strike again. Rail could shift some loads, yet railheads sit far from many gun lines, and transfers add risk at each node. Even a partial collapse would force engineers to test every span, and those checks create more hours with fewer lanes open. Commanders would have to choose which units get fuel first, and those choices echo through the fight. That is why the underbridge plan mattered, because the next move targeted the structure, not the sky. The underbridge trap exploited a blind zone that aerial radars rarely resolve, because beams skim past steel and water while echoes bounce into clutter that looks harmless. Small strike drones and compact charges were fixed to crossmembers and pier faces, hidden as maintenance kits and painted to match stained concrete, so sentries saw routine hardware and not weapons. That creates cover where expensive sensors have little reach, which is exactly where asymmetric plans grow. Activation relied on a single encrypted burst that lasted only a few milliseconds, and that microsignal carried a wake command plus a timestamp to align every device. The packet used low power and a narrow pattern to avoid detection, while frequency hopping limited easy triangulation by patrol receivers or civilian scanners near the site. Once confirmed, a one-time pad unlocked the mission state and armed the sequence, so the network stayed dark until the appointed instant. With arming complete, control shifted to local guidance that did not depend on satellite fixes, because jammers often flood civil bands and degrade GPS in river corridors. Each airframe used an inertial unit, optical flow, and a stored map of beams and joints to read shapes like a maze, while a barometric cue held altitude within a tight band. By referencing the structure itself, the drones reduced external signatures and kept navigation immune to spoofed coordinates, which is how autonomy beats noise in tight spaces. The strike package prioritized structural nodes rather than vehicles, since piers, bearings, and main girders carry bending forces that grow when heavy loads stack at midspan. Shaped charges pointed into concrete at set angles, and delayed fuses created a closed-space pressure hit that travels farther along cavities than an open blast would do. Targets were assigned by cell to avoid duplicate impacts and to produce simultaneous failures along the load path, because synchronized stress breaks faster than scattered damage. Command logic included strict safeties to prevent accidental triggering, and those layers mattered on a live crossing with traffic overhead. Each device demanded 3 conditions before action. The convoy's center had to sit within a geofence, vehicle speed had to fall below a set threshold, and the time window had to match the plan. Only when all gates turned green did the arming latch move to execute, so misreads could not push a premature strike during a routine inspection pass. Power discipline kept signatures low while the trap waited, since idle current kills batteries faster than motion ever will. Smart clamps harvested tiny vibrations from the span to top up cells, while sleep cycles cut drain by orders of magnitude, and that housekeeping allowed 72 hours of quiet readiness without a service crew. Low heat output also reduced the chance of thermal pickup from handheld cameras along the embankment, which preserved the illusion of harmless fixtures. The disguise strategy leaned on human habits, because workers learned to ignore familiar shapes that never move. Faded labels, fake serial tags, and grease residue helped the mimicry, while placement near real junction boxes made the picture look boring, and bored eyes wander past danger. When the column stalled at center, the camouflage had already done its work, which meant the kill geometry was ready before anyone looked down. The final step was timing, because arrival of the convoy alone was not enough. The plan demanded stillness to stack weight and maximize bending, so the control node watched wheel speed from acoustic cues and waited for brakes to squeal and engines to idle. Only then did the command release from hold to fire, which is how a small network turns mass into leverage. That is the moment when protection from above began to matter less than blind corners below, which leads directly to the sensor clash that followed. The first real clash came from a single radar return that looked wrong, and a junior officer chose to shoot before the picture cleared. He flipped from passive search to active pulse, and the beam lit the underside of the span where echoes live. A 57 E6 raced off the rail and met a tiny decoy that had been waiting to be found, and the warhead turned scrap into spray without touching the threat. That was a bad trade because one expensive shot killed something cheap, and the emission revealed the battery's location to anyone listening. The countdown toward gridlock started with that impulse, and that is where control began to slip. The blast jolted every headset on the bridge, and the net filled with overlapping calls that turned order into noise. VHF, UHF, and digital links carried the same words from different mouths, and the repeating traffic blocked clear commands. Rules of engagement forced crews to confirm targets under the deck, and nobody wanted to fire blind into steel and rebar. Supervisors raised alert states, sent fresh queries, and burned seconds they could not spare while engines idled and nerves rose. The talk kept growing faster than the picture improved, and that flood set up the brake lights that followed. Heavy trucks do not stop like cars, and a convoy on a narrow span has no shoulder to give space. Drivers saw flashes, heard contact, and hit pedals that take long strokes, and the distance closed faster than training allowed. A trailer swung, another stalled, and gaps vanished as ton after ton stacked over the same beams. Guardrails pinned vehicles inside lanes, and the center of the bridge carried a weight it was never meant to hold while wheels locked and smoke rose. The column had become a wall on concrete, and that wall sat exactly where a planner hoped it would sit. Sensors tried to make sense of the scene, yet the geometry beat them, because bridges confuse machines that want clean angles. Ground-moving filters track approach and retreat, and targets flying sideways disappear into static that looks like structure. Multipaths from water and steel bounced energy back into the dish, and the display filled with ghosts that chased each other in circles. Thermal views saw hot engines above cool concrete, and small airframes near the girders blended into background heat. Radios kept asking for clarity while the picture got worse, and confusion is a kind of fog that slows every hand. Ukraine did not rush in because patience here does more damage than speed, and quiet pressure wins time. Decoys stayed scarce to avoid a pattern, and jammers spoke in short bursts that blinded without pointing to their own source. Small drones hugged shadows and cut power draw, and the network listened for engine idle, brake squeal, and horn echoes. The goal was to hold the jam in place, not to score quick hits, because fixed targets make math simple and strikes cleaner. Tempo stayed low by design, and low tempo turned a scare into a trap. Weight on midspan means bending grows fast, and physics does not care who owns the bridge, since numbers rule concrete. A stretch of 30 loaded trucks can add thousands of kilonewtons to a few bays, and bearings hate that kind of stacked stress. Commanders knew a stray shot under the deck could hit fuel or explosive cargo, and that risk froze fingers on triggers. Clear lanes for fire never appeared, and the safe shot never came, while the structure kept drinking more force. The window opened wider each minute, and the target set became the bridge itself. By the time the network calmed, the convoy could not move, and the span held more mass than wise engineers like to see. Drivers waited for orders that did not arrive, and crews stared at screens that no longer told a clean story. The shield above was still thick, yet the danger lived below the line of sight, and that danger was ready. With the jam locked and the load stacked, the strike could shift from confusion to precision, which is where the pillars would face the real test. The strike shifted from confusion to precision as the underbridge network fired in a fixed pattern that aimed at the main supports, because structure fails faster when force meets the right joints. Charges pointed into concrete at set angles, and the jets cut through cover plates and rebar cages, while delayed fuses created a compressed shock inside the cavities. Water below trapped the blast and threw pressure back into the span, and the deck above sealed the pocket, so the wave folded into itself and grew. That is how a confined detonation hits harder than an open one, and that is why local failure can turn into global collapse when loads are stacked. Priority targets were the pier faces, the bearing seats, and the midspan girders, since those elements carry bending that peaks when heavy trucks stop together. A clean breach at a bearing let the deck slide and drop, and a fractured web in a main girder made neighboring beams take sudden stress, which they were never designed to hold. Once the load path broke in more than one place, the center could not share weight, and the deck began to sag in a broad, slow arc. That arc set up the final fall, and the fall turned steel into hammers that kept smashing the pier noses. The timing hit while ammunition carriers sat above the weak zone, and the first impact cracked crates and tore latches that were built for roads, not shock. Propellant cooked before high explosive did, and the burn front ran along boxes and pallets, while hot fragments punched holes across tarps and sidewalls. Cook-off spread as pressure rose, and every burst blew more shrapnel into tires, tanks, and wiring looms. The bridge turned from a point target into a fire source, and the heat licked at fuel hoses until they failed. Diesel does not flash like gas, but it burns hot when it pools, and a tilted deck makes pools flow to the same spot. That pool sat near the break, and flames climbed the soffit, which baked the concrete and popped spalls along the edge. Spalls exposed more steel, and exposed steel softened as the minutes passed, so stiffness dropped while the fire grew. Vehicles near the hinge line slid toward the gap, and some went over, which cleared more space for flames to draw air. Falling mass tore utilities and guardrails, and the torn lines whipped back across crews who tried to move, so recovery stalled before it began. The center span parted, and the cross-section no longer carried traffic, which meant the route was lost even if side bays held. Any attempt to fight the blaze faced blast risk, because scattered rounds kept going off and sent fragments in wide cones. Engineers could not step onto a deck that moved underfoot, and divers could not work under a rain of steel, so on-scene options stayed thin. Even a partial hole would have closed the bridge for days, yet a full cut forced planners to think in weeks, not hours. Cheap charges had bought a very expensive mess, and the cost exchange tilted hard toward the attacker. A single failed span blocks both banks at once, and a blocked crossing slows guns before maps change, which is what operational art tries to do. The picture now moved beyond steel and smoke toward supply and choice, because every minute without flow builds pressure on command. With the center gone and the fire still hot, the next fight would be about routes, stocks, and leverage, which leads directly to the logistics hit and the political fallout. The collapse turned a bridge into a blockade, and that blockade cut the lifeline for Russian units on the far bank. Guns face rationing because shell trucks cannot cross, and tempo drops when batteries fire half loads to hold reserves. Fuel stocks fall in parallel, since recovery crews burn diesel while searching for detours, and those detours take longer than planners admit. Engineers cannot work fast under threat, so repair windows shrink to short night slots, and even then a single blast can halt progress for a day. Pontoon sets and ferries exist, yet they move slowly and need wide cover, and wide cover pulls air defense away from other tasks. Rail can carry bulk, but transloading at distant yards adds handling risk, and every extra lift is one more chance to lose time. The cost picture tilts hard, because cheap drones and decoys force expensive interceptors into the air, while one ruined span removes far more throughput than the price of charges. Air defense crews also face reload gaps, and those gaps create new windows for follow-on strikes, which multiplies the value of the first hit. Convoy doctrine will change under stress, so spacing grows, routes split, and crossing times scatter, yet all of that reduces daily tonnage. Commanders must pick winners and losers for fuel and shells, and those choices echo across the line as units pause to wait their turn. Politically, leverage falls when supply weakens, And any stalled offensive talks like a bad headline even before the next meeting. Public signals, satellite frames, smoke plumes, and fresh NOTAMs shape pressure on negotiators, and pressure invites outside actors to push their own terms. Deterrence also shifts, since a proven choke point method tends to repeat, and repetition forces budgets toward protection instead of attack. All of that points toward a strategic conclusion because the fight now turns on roots, not rhetoric, and that is where the final takeaway belongs. The lesson is simple and sharp. A bridge can break a campaign when timing, weak points, and cost math line up against a long supply line. This strike showed that logistics fail first under pressure because stacked trucks, tight lanes, and blind corners leave no room to recover. Air shields that look strong from the sky still miss threats that live on steel and water, so defense must watch low angles, not just high arcs. Commanders who want tempo must spread convoys, vary crossing hours, and place EO/IR pickets along riverbanks, since sensors near the deck close the gaps that radars ignore. Engineers also need plans for fast spans and guarded ferries, while reload drills for air defense units cut the window that follow-on raids try to use. In the short term, watch emergency repairs, traffic reroutes, and the movement of Panzer S-1 toward bridgeheads, because those signals reveal where pressure will move next. Also track jamming bursts, decoy use, and satellite heat plumes over piers, as these clues show whether this choke point method will repeat along the route. Strategy now turns on routes, not rhetoric, and the side that protects crossings faster will set the pace across the front. Subscribe to Military Force for clear maps, verified numbers, and sharp breakdowns, and tell us which defense layer you would harden first.